Why is your study important?
So thank you, Jelena, for this opportunity. Our study is a systematic literature review of relational HRM. And relational HRM is how HR practices and work relationships influence each other. This study is important because both work relationships and HR practices are extremely powerful tools for organizations to enhance employee productivity and well-being and gain a competitive advantage. So traditionally, HR practices were developed to manage human capital, that is, to enhance their skills, knowledge. However, in today's knowledge-based economy, individuals are more interconnected and they require increased collaboration and they exchange information and support constantly. So this demands workplace relationships, especially positive workplace relationship, which can be challenging to establish or maintain. Properly designed and implemented HR practices can be a very important tool for organizations to create and nurture positive work relationships. It's also crucial to recognize that the influence doesn't flow solely from HR practices to work relationships. What I'm trying to say is that work relationships can also shape HR practices. So effective implementation of a practice requires frequent, respectful communication among employees, managers, HR, senior leaders, and other internal and external stakeholders. When organizational actors foster positive work relationships marked by, for example, mutual support and trust, it motivates both implementers and the users of HR practice to embrace and advocate for them. Our research is important because it consolidates disparate and sparse literature at the intersection of HR practice and work relationship. We conducted a systematic literature review of 195 quantitative studies published in last 2 decades, investigating the association between HR practices and work relationships. And we offer directions for future research by identifying strengths and areas in need of improvement. Hugh, would you like to add something to this?
Look, for me, one of the things that's really important in a field where I think we all have a broad-based understanding that HRM is important for value creation and for employees. And so work relationships, they're at the centre of everything. But we have a sort of a vast literature which sort of engages with those two topics. And so when you have that sort of disparate literature, there's certainly the benefit of having some review articles to synthesize what we know and what we don't know. So certainly for this paper, what I liked about what I guess the positioning of how to put it together was it does give us a little bit of insight about what are the strengths and weaknesses of that literature and what do we know and what do we not know. And from that, I think we're in a stronger position to look at future research directions that can help to fill out some of those gaps.
Thank you. So what did you find?
Review. So our review reveals several critical insights regarding the association between HR practices and work relationships. But due to time constraint, we are just going to focus on a subset of our findings. So firstly, we found that most studies primarily concentrate or focus on employees' relationships with their managers, especially immediate managers or supervisors and coworkers. So this focus is expected because HR practices primarily concern employees. But it is also very important to understand and distinguish between other work relationship dynamics among managers at different levels, between senior leaders and external stakeholders, and so on. This understanding the different dynamics of relationships in the workplace setting can help HR managers tailor their strategies to improve employee satisfaction, collaboration, and overall organizational and employee well-being. So different types of relationships may require different approaches to foster trust, collaboration, and overall effectiveness in the organization. We also identified that there is a need to explore how relationships affect HR practices, because we noticed that more attention has been given to how HR practices influence relationships. But in real world, everything is dynamic. So, HR practices influence work relationships, and it doesn't stop there. HR practices and work relationships are continuously affecting each other, shaping each other in an iterative way. For example, mentoring program, if it positively influences an employee's relationships with their mentor, due to this positive relational experience, they can encourage other coworkers to join the program. But this may be, again, influenced by the network position of this employee, whether the coworkers are going to listen to him or not and join the program. So to model a research that is consistent to the real world dynamic of relational HR, future research or researchers need to conduct longitudinal studies to understand this iterative process.
Why does it matter? So what are the implications for theory, for knowledge in the field?
We don't really know a lot about how different relational dynamics, positive, negative, conflictual relationships affect how people engage with the HR infrastructure in an organisation. And those sorts of issues, I think, are increasingly becoming prominent as more and more research accumulates about perceptions of HR. So I would really hope that the reviews and other work in this space really helps to spur some of the new directions that will take the HR literature over the next 5 to 10 years. What I would say from a theoretical perspective is that there are some commonalities from the review where we point to the need for a dynamic consideration of relationships. And another way of thinking about this is to really bring in that idea of time and longitudinal research. There's always a common refrain, we need more longitudinal research. It's hard to do, but certainly I think in the relational sphere, it's absolutely essential, because we know that relationships are ongoing, they're unfolding over time, they have events that shape those relationships. And so moving away from a static perspective to really thinking about what is the history and what is the anticipated future of that relationship, I think is absolutely central and a really important part of sort of where I'd like to see the field move in relational HR. And so certainly a strong part of the current review was centred around sort of sketching out those directions.
Thank you. What do your results mean for HR policy or the practice of HR? So really, what can practitioners or policymakers learn from your findings?
So our review highlights the importance of considering work relationships when designing and implementing the HR practices. For the practices to be successful, practitioners need to identify what type of HR practices are creating positive and productive work relationships, and what types are creating disruptive work relationships. And they also need to leverage work relationships to create HR practice implementation processes that are effective in achieving the intended outcomes. For instance, as suggested in our review, scholars and practitioners, they can explore how an HR manager's network may influence employees' acceptance and use of HR practices differently depending on HR managers' network position, centrality, tie strength, because there are times employees, reject HR practices or they show resistance. So if the employees have a certain kind of relationship, or HR managers have better influence on them because of a certain kind of relational dynamics with them, maybe they will accept it more. So by recognizing the interplay between work relationships and HR practices, organizations can cultivate more effective HR strategies. They can foster improved workplace dynamics and ultimately enhance overall performance and employee well-being.
Great.
Just to add onto that, I think from a practical point of view, the contribution of the review is to maybe move the focus, which has been very employee-centric around HRM, to think about a broader diversity of other actors that exist both within and outside the organisation. So at the back end of our review, we have a figure which charts out 15 specific types of relationships that exist within and outside organisations amongst employees and top managers, supervisors, HR managers and external actors. And to provide some really concrete, practical examples of HR practices and how they affect relationships, and also the reverse side of that dynamic, how those relationships shape people's engagement with those HR practices, whether that's HR managers or top managers or supervisors. And so certainly I think one of the really potential practical implications of the review is just to push a bit more consideration towards what are the things that we can do from an HR practice point of view that shape the relationships that exist between HR managers and top management, or HR managers and first line supervisors, or HR managers and external actors. So I think there's a degree of actionality in those suggestions that we provide.
That really sounds great, and I'm sure that managers and policymakers will find this extremely useful. Thank you very much again for participating in this interview.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.